Welcome back to the Retirement Factorio base. As you can see on the screen right now, the base is now crunching out it's 900 science per minute of each and every kind of science. The square wave you see there is the space science, which of course comes in big bursts. And on the right is everything that we're consuming. And you can see that I have been stable for the last 10 hours or so. It took several hours for us to get to the steady state where we had drained all of our buffers down to the steady state of them. You know, where you drain a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then suddenly you get a delivery of steel, and now your steel is baking and so on. But at this point we are stable, and if I look at the last hour, these consumption numbers on the right should fairly well match up with the planning numbers. I am going to treat this from now on as my reference base because it's just working. I think we've worked out all of the bugs and things like forgetting to turn on this request or that request or whatever. So what I thought I would do is just do a quick tour of the base, starting from the mines and heading down through each section of the base, and review what we've got and how it's working. And I will be skipping forward on the video rather than having people have to watch a video of me in my Spidertron crawling across the factory. So here's a typical mine. And we have quite a number of these scattered around over here. I added these as necessary to assure that we didn't have LTN popping up and saying, "Oh, you have no iron ore." So we've got iron ore. This mine happens to be one of the ones that seems to be getting regular trains. So what I've got is a standard mine layout. And I don't even trim this. I just place it all down. The mines actually go all the way to the edge here in the blueprint. And each one of the miners actually has... was supposed to have efficiency modules in them. Originally when I built this, I had efficiency modules in the miners so that they would be minus 80%. Oh, there we go. Hit Alt, Greg. There we go. So they have two, I believe, Class 2 efficiency modules in them. This reduces the energy consumption to minus 80%, which is as far as you can go. So there's no need for a third module. There's no need to use efficiency 3s, just a pair of efficiency 2s. If I put a speed module in there, it's going to kill a lot of our efficiency gains. The idea of this is that this mine still produces quite a lot of iron, and it's going to last a long time because we are not mining as quickly as possible. I would prefer to have more mines producing than to have to go jump around from mine to mine. The second thing is our power is coming from solar power, so we want to minimize that. So these guys are taking 20%, 1/5 of their normal energy, and we can see from our energy production that our almost 10 gigawatts of total capacity are more than enough. We're using usually on the order of 4.5 gigawatts. So we're doing okay. I actually thought I was going to have to build more solar, but that, you know, the solar that got built earlier, which is admittedly huge, is more than enough. So we do this whole mining thing, and we have a nice balancer here to balance it across the 8 lanes, and I'm feeding into 2 bulk rail loaders, so we split between them. Either one can accept the entire belt, or we can split it half and half if both of them are low. So we are configured to provide our bounty, our iron ore. Once we have 360 stacks stacked up, It's actually 320 fill the train. 360 assures that even if these get out of balance somehow, the chances of it being so far out of balance that one of our train cars won't fill is practically zero. So we've got trains coming and going there. And now I'm going to pause the recording while I run across the landscape to the next thing, which will be my iron smelters and steel smelters. While we're running across the landscape here, I figured I would open this up and show just for a second. We have ore trains that are stopping in our various smelters for iron and copper and brick and steel. They get called in as needed. They're not too frequent, but they do arrive. This should be one now. And they all come in from on the right. You'll notice that the trains are pretty good at dodging each other. We do get the occasional slowdown. Mostly when I'm looking at trains that slow down and wait for others, mostly what I'm seeing is trains are heading back to the depot. And you see we have a bunch of trains in the depots, so I'm not too worried about those. Okay, and here we're arriving at one of our busier steel foundries. You can see we have this absolute river of iron ore just flowing in from the train stop, and we will have almost constant requests out for these guys. Let's show. So we currently have 2 trains on their way. We could go up to 4 or 5. I think these have a limit of 8. And this absolute river of iron now flows down through the smelter, and remember, 1 belt of iron becomes 1/5 of a belt of steel, and we see it backing up here. We caught this at just the right time. It has filled up the output station, and we're just beginning to saturate up here. This is a steel smelter design that should be very familiar to Factorio players at this point. It's the one that requires the medium electric poles, where you get the coal and the iron being fed in here and forwarded, and then in the middle you have 1 belt for the output and 1 belt for the coal. This isn't the normal layout that a speedrunner would use. It's a little fiddly to set up the first time, and you really want to have bots on it. You'll also notice that even though I have built what I consider to be a reference megabase, I'm not using electric furnaces here. And that's for the same reason that I covered when I was talking about the efficiency modules. Our power comes from solar, and we only have 10 gigawatts of solar power available to us. And if I wanted to use electric furnaces, their footprint is slightly larger, especially when you put the furnace in plus the modules. Now, if you completely speed module and the beacons and productivity module the furnace, the actual footprint of the furnace gets a little smaller, but it just absolutely sucks electricity. And that's an option if you're going, say, nuclear power. But if you're going to go nuclear power, you're not going to be maintaining that 60 updates per second that I really wanted to see. Speaking of, if I let the game run as quickly as possible, zoom into the normal. Ooh, almost killed myself there. We can get anywhere from 160 to 200 UPS. It tends to float up and down depending on what the factory is doing. This is not as high as I'd hoped. I was hoping to get a nice steady state of 300 or more. but this really is only using a few cores of my CPU. And because the CPU I chose was one that stressed more cores rather than higher core speed, okay, I'm happy with this. But the fact is that I can get a nice solid 60 UPS with plenty of headroom. I could double the size of this base and it'd still be at 60 or so. It might occasionally drop down at that scale. But I sit here like this, and this just locks in and stays there. Let me get back in the Spidertron so I don't get hit by a train. So where do we go from here? Well, there are some parts of my factory down below that receive plates on the 3/8 trains here, but mainly what I want is for these to feed down to here. And I am no longer happy with this design for the wholesale area, for the warehouse area. Yes, it is true. We do get... I had to make some changes. First off, I can't use the bulk loaders in these 1-4 areas because people requesting plates often cannot handle receiving an entire train load. Receivers that are trying to buffer everything into a single steel chest, for example, would have to wait until they're almost completely out before requesting a train, or they have to tolerate having multiple trains backed up. And I reworked this thinking that I was going to let the trains go with smaller loads. And I think that was wrong now. I think I would be happier with what I ended up with elsewhere, which is if a station requires a fairly large volume but can only tolerate a 1-4 train bringing it to them. Now, if we're on that cusp where we're almost too big for a 1-4, but we can't justify doing a 3/8, go ahead and let it request a lot more than it can buffer, and that will have multiple trains backing up. And if we're going to do that on a general basis, these 1-4s can continue to use the bulk rail, the bulk loaders. So I dithered back and forth on this, and that's up for future exploration. We can see here that we have trains on the move already. So this train's coming to get some. This train's coming to get some. So from here, well, we could go look at the rest of these, but these are all the same heading out to the right. Just like all the smelters are the same, roughly. With the exception the steel smelting uses a furnace into a furnace. The rest of these are just single furnaces, so no real interesting changes on the furnaces. And the warehouses are literally carbon copies of each other. The only thing that these differ on is the programming of the requester station. You also notice that up here we have the delivery train. We requested the delivery train in even though our bulk unloaders are not balanced. So you see here that this station is full and ready to deliver a train. There's a train. And its bulk loaders up here that we're feeding it were more full than the rest, and when we start draining them, now the rest of it comes through. So that's how the warehouses work. Again, next time I build them, I'm going to go back to the bulk loaders. Either I will do that, or or maybe I will just build the 32 to 32 balancer that goes in here. I'd rather build either 32 to 32 or build 4 separate 8-to-8 balancers, so I have the 4 lines coming out of each wagon, and they get balanced going down. We'll have to figure that out at some point. But that's for the future, and it doesn't change the fact that this base numerically is a good reference. fact, if I was going to do that, what I would do is I would build new warehouses down below that use the new layout and then start shifting things over. So before I go onward down to the other assemblies, let's go take a look at the oil real quick. I'll do a quick stop at the crude oil and then head up to the oil refineries. Okay, just a quick pause here at the oil field. I expected to have to build more than one of these, and it turns out that these are just doing just fine. So we have all of our oil derricks. These are completely have no come on. They have no modules in them whatsoever. They're just there. No speed modules, no productivity modules, no efficiency modules, no nothing. I was going to put some modules in, and then I thought, I don't know which ones. So then I decided I'm going to wait to put modules in until I see what I need. And it turns out that I didn't actually need any modules whatsoever. We take a look at our electricity here. We go down and we look at the energy we are spending on oil. Oops. On oil derricks. So for this is 250 hours, or a little over 10 days. So with the exception of a few very small blips, we have been running right here. Whoops. Why is that assembly machines 2? Oil derricks. There we go. For the last 10 days of factory time, here's our profile. And yeah, when we weren't busy, our pump jacks dropped back to practically no energy. And when we are busy, like we have been recently, we're sitting here at, less than a megawatt. So we look at our last 10 hours. This is the 10 hour that we've been testing. So when we turned it on just a little, right around 10 hours ago, see here's where I actually turned on the research without modules, or without creative mod. So we had to ramp up as people had to draw down their stocks before they triggered the next stage of the factory. And this is where we're sitting now. We're sitting at, well, let's see, in the last hour, 838 kilowatts average. Now, if we throw that up on the screen, along with some other things, for instance, let's compare that to, I don't know, how much are we spending on lamps? Dude, we could get rid of the lamps and shave off 21 megawatts during the night. Okay? But 21 megawatts during the night is not really that interesting because we're spending 43 megawatts on the average on just stack inserters. But that's not a whole lot because, well, chemical plants are running 150 megawatts and assemblers are 1.8 gigawatts and beacons at 2 gigawatts. Those the beacons are drawing all this crazy energy. Look at this. The beacons draw crazy energy even when the factory itself is not busy. Okay, so there's an argument there for not beaconing things up randomly. I beaconed up a lot of stuff. I didn't beacon the smelters. I didn't beacon anything in the mining areas, but I did beacon all of my assembler areas. So yeah, maybe I went overboard on that. So the last 10 hours during our test period, we averaged about 2 gigawatts, but our electricity capacity is about 10. It's nighttime right now, so we're not seeing it, but if we look at the last 10 minutes, you can see here that our solar panels can source 9.7 gigawatts, which means we probably want to average 2/3 of that because it's going to have to charge up the accumulators. So think of this space as being rated at 6 gigawatts, and we're currently running 4.3. So we haven't got a huge margin, but it's there. Anyway, so much of the brief stop at the crude oil area. Onward up to the refinery. Okay, here we are up in the petroleum area. Rather than having a whole bunch of trains carting various petroleum byproduct fluids around, I decided to package all of my petroleum stuff up in one area. And because the volumes are so high, I divided it into 4 slices. Let's look at just one slice at a time. We've got our crude oil coming in the top, and it gets pumped out in 4 locations and scattered 4 ways to the wind. So, looking at one slice, first we've got the advanced oil refinery. Normal, normal, normal. And that gives us our petroleum gas, light oil, and heavy oil. I feed that directly into some chemical labs to implement the cracking. My idea here is that independent of anything else that's happening in the factory, if we have just about filled ourselves up with heavy oil, so if we have a large amount of heavy oil, we're going to take these 4 labs, crack the heavy to light, and send the light out. So these guys are always available and always have input. What we're gating here is pumping its output into the light oil area. Similarly, if we have a high stock of light oil, we turn on the pump that takes the petroleum gas that's being produced by the light oil crackers. So the output from this should be nicely pressurized lines with heavy oil, light oil, and petroleum gas. And if we are not consuming stuff, what this will do is it will tend to favor cracking things rather than having the refineries stall. We don't want the refineries to stall. If we can't handle it, we would rather crack it and send it up here. And I've been fiddling around with these buffer sizes as time goes by, and I got up to 4, didn't have to go to 5 on each, so that's about right. So do that in four places, and the output of each one of these nicely fits inside a pipeline. All 4 of them together, maybe it would fit, maybe it wouldn't. So we gather all of the heavy oil together. I just realized that's kind of weird. That's really kind of weird. Let me go ahead and fix this if I can. There. So it is possible that 1/4 of my petroleum has been lagging because it could not sink its heavy oil anywhere but no, it would have cracked it. Okay. And we use up so little lube. Turns out that you only need 1/2 of one lab making all the lube for the entire factory. I've got 8. I got 16 times the lube that I need, so that's not a big deal actually. So no harm, no foul. So that's all we do with the heavy oil is we make it lube and we crack it to light. Take the light oil and we bring it down to here. Now, the most efficient way to turn crude oil into solid fuel is to crack the heavy oil into light and turn the light oil into solid fuel. And you can turn petroleum gas into solid fuel, but it turns out that we need enough petroleum gas that I didn't need to put in some special logic. If we weren't using a whole lot of plastic and such, I would also be building solid fuel out of petroleum gas, and I would have some fancy logic to pick, which solid fuel source. But we make the solid fuel, and the only thing we're using that solid fuel for is to make rocket fuel here. So light oil into solid fuel, and light oil plus solid fuel goes into rocket fuel. And trying to get all of this together was really kind of a pain, because I couldn't sneak all of the lines through that I wanted as compact as I wanted. Then I realized I can bring it out here with a mini loader, underground it across, and then load it onto both sides of this belt. So that's where we got. So each quarter of the factory gives us a belt that has rocket fuel on it. And I do not have max rate calculator loaded. I keep hitting Control N, and without max rate calculator I can't show you what the capacity of that is. So all of our rocket fuel ends up going in here. Now again, this was a mistake. This station can only batch up 3.8K. Now the stations on the other end are going to want quite a bit. So what happens is somebody sends us a train and we fill it up, and another train, we can fill up a second train, but by the time we get to the third train, it's now dependent upon how fast our rocket fuel is being made. And our actual drain rate on rocket fuel is low. I mean, it's like under 900 per minute total for the whole factory, including, well, let's take a look. That was my estimate, was 900 a minute. Let's take a look here. Last hour, total consumption of rocket fuel. So we average 725 rocket fuel per minute. And yet, if we get 3 trains sent to us from 3 different people, all wanting a full train load, that third train has to wait. So once in a while you do see warnings like this. So somebody wants, the third or the fourth guy up on the list pops up, first one gets it, second one gets it, third one, yeah, not quite. So we get this, and then shortly after that our production is kicked in, and we've got some more, and we've got enough to source it. So there's the rocket fuel. What I would like to do in the long run is, of course, make it so that my rocket fuel can do a better job here. You almost want to have one station that is a 1-4 train using bulk loaders, and that just goes off to making the rocket. And then off to the side somewhere, you have like 5 or 6 stations that are for 1-1 trains, little flea trains. And the only thing you do with your flea trains is move the rocket fuel to the depots, because a depot doesn't require a lot of rocket fuel. I mean, I know from experience that if you have no logistics robots in a depot, and you start off with all your trains with full fuel, so they've got 90 rocket fuel, it can take 3 hours before you start having trains running out of fuel. So I'm thinking that a 1-1 train delivering fuel to the depots is more than enough. And in fact, it is tempting to pull a trick like what you're about to see at one of the depots, to actually do rocket fuel separately. So the main refinery doesn't do rocket fuel for the depots. It only does rocket fuel for the main station. Anyway, we'll get into on-site oil refineries somewhere else. So once we've got the lubricant and the rocket fuel taken care of, everything else basically is petroleum gas. So you see that we have 2 pipelines of gas coming down the left, and 2 on the right that are just the same. So the next stage is sulfur and sulfuric acid and batteries. And we actually do not require very many machines. This is overkill for this factory, but you can see we're cranking away here. Oh, I didn't mention it above, but this right here, the deep water well, this is the add-on that I'm using so that I don't have to truck water into all sorts of places, include all sorts of water drop stations all over my factory. Uh, it's, I think, maybe a little cheaty. It takes away the challenge of how do I get the water to the right place. On the other hand, the challenge for this factory was to figure out the correct ratios and what I wanted to build where, and um, which factories would combine multiple products and how. So uh, bringing water in on a train is something best left for some other time. If I was going to augment this design, what I would do is put a train station off to the side for bringing in massive amounts of water, and then just pump it out to everywhere. There's actually quite a lot of water involved in this. The water wells themselves are 1,200 per minute, no, excuse me, 1,200 per second, same as the offshore pumps, which is a lot of water. So this is overkill for this guy. But we do require quite a lot of water for the whole refiner area, and it would be kind of challenging to run it all through one or two pipes, or to run it through a bunch of pipes with a bunch of pumps and so on. Anyway, so we provide sulfur. I believe that's for chemical science, requires sulfur. We require batteries for a few things, and we require sulfuric acid for a few things. And we do not have any of our add-ons up, so I can't bring up the plan to show you what is there. And in fact, I just realized I have saved this over my normal save, so there's no going back at this point. This save is now a minimal mod, just to have the mods necessary to run the reference factory. I no longer have factory planner or handy hands or creative mod or any of that stuff. Okay, next step is what I consider to be the heavy hitter of the petroleum area, which is the plastic. We require coal. We require quite a lot of coal. I think the numbers that I worked up were we required slightly over 2 belts of coal, 2 blue belts, 2 full saturated blue belts of coal. So when I divided it up into 4, I thought, okay, well, let's just peel out of each one of these unloaders. We've got 4 mini loaders. So we will just do the balanced mini loader thing. I kept having to inch up the threshold number on these guys. That's been an ongoing concern. When do you turn those on? When do you turn those off? The warehouses actually had to have them very high because there were long stretches of belts after them, and if you didn't have them high enough, they would just never really kick off properly. You'd end up with not being able to bring a train in because somebody was too high. Anyway, so 2+ blue belts worth of coal. You see how fast this guy's moving in here. I mean, he's not saturated, but he's over half the belt. That goes into plastic, and each one of these guys, while they have just over half a belt of coal coming in, that means they've got just over 1 belt of plastic going out. And when I started looking at how to snake it out, how to spaghetti the edge of this to get it to go out horizontally, then I realized I could use the same trick that I used above, where I used the mini loaders and then balance things on the output. So this is overkill. You end up with basically 8 half belts, and you merge them together into belts, and then you do a 4 to 2, and this is overkill. I only really need these last 2. I didn't need all the rest of the stuff up to there, but I was still messing with it at that point. When I originally put that in, I thought I'd need 4, and that goes into my 8 to 8 balancer. Not the most efficient 8 to 8 balancer, but I like the look of it. And So we get these 8 belts, and I'm feeding them into these guys. It is tempting to say, well, geez, I can go ahead and use bulk rail loaders for the plastic. I mean, plastic bars, they're kind of bulk, right? But if I start doing that, if I don't draw the line firmly, I have to do things like, well, you know, we can put circuit boards through the bulk loader, right? Well, no, not really. Anyway, so I thought 2 blue belts into each wagon should be fast enough to load it. Certainly our production is fast enough to keep up. So we have 2 stations, each with 2 boxes, and this can deliver fast enough to fill up each station. You can fill them both up in parallel at a reduced rate, or all of the output can go to a single station. You see how fast these are getting picked up. We've got 2 trains in that station already. The other station's got 2 trains coming. So yeah, so there's the plastic. And that is the oil refinery area. I've got it labeled up here. So the trick I want to talk about with the on-site is over here at the Ltn Depot. This is the depot for the trains that move fluids, the 3/8 trains that move fluids. Currently, there's only one thing I move in a 3/8 train with fluids. That's crude oil. Now, if for some reason I'm not moving crude oil, I'm certainly not going to be getting any rocket fuels. So this particular depot differs from the other depots in that its fuel drop is requesting in crude oil. Okay? We get the crude oil coming in. We've got enough buffer space here for 2 trains worth. We're going to request when we've got maybe half a train worth in the buffers. It's all down there. I have no idea how much production I need for this. So what I did was I said, well, I will just put in a refinery for every tanker car. And then I thought, well, how much solid fuel production do I want? Well, let's put 2 chemical plants for each one because that's what fits. And I'm using the basic oil refining. I know I could get more fuel out of this. I could get more solid fuel out of this if I used advanced and cracked the heavy to light and then made all the light oil into solid fuel and all the petroleum. But this is more than enough because I'm only fueling these trains from it. So in reality, I could do this with just one tanker and 1 refinery and 1 chemical plant. So this is total frickin' overkill. Anyway, that gets me solid fuel. And the solid fuel is distributed by the logistic robots out to these guys, just the same way that I do the rocket fuel elsewhere. This means my crude oil trains are slightly slower than the other ones, but the crude oil goes from the depot to the crude oil field to the refinery. So they don't go very far. That's good enough. And a short walk to the south. This is the depot for the 1/4 trains. These guys are handling delivery of lubricant and sulfuric acid into the main factory. There's not much call for it. Late in the game, after I got everything basically laid out, I went ahead and just made sure that every depot station had a train in it. I mean, why not, right? Some of my depots were running a bit hairy. So at the end of the last recording, I was just finishing up. I think I'd done one of the iron warehouses, and obviously I replicated those out. The other thing that I did was I went out and I went to all of the people that use it, all of these guys down here that hadn't been converted yet to use the 3/8 trains of plates, and I set those up to grab plates from the warehouses. And it works, and we'll get into that shortly. So the next place we want to go is the electronic circuits. So through the magic of cuts and videos, okay, here we are in the electronic circuit factory. Little teeny build. This is a mega base, but this factory only provides the electronic circuits for the higher level assemblers that require electronic circuits. This is not feeding the advanced circuits or the processors. They have their own on-site stuff. It turns out that there aren't very many things other than red chips and blue chips that require green chips. So real simple. It requires a rather large volume of iron and copper. So we go ahead and stripe out all of our iron and copper, one blue belt per wagon. We then balance it so that no matter what lanes of the factory are drawing at any given time, we are able to draw from whichever bulk unloader has stuff. We drag the copper and the iron out and down and feed it right into this guy. And yeah, this does use up quite a bit of it. Again, I don't have max rate calculator or the planner, but yeah, this was... I'm not sure whether we actually need 8, but I know we need more than 4. I think it was 6 belts of copper and 6 plus belts of copper and 4 plus belts of iron or something. Or with these modules. Okay, this 1-to-1 ratio here, this is actually 15 to 14 ratio. So we would normally need 15 machines making coils to 14 machines making green circuits. So we are going to be not quite saturating these guys, but that means that the 1-to-1, this really, you know, I would have to go back to my notes now to figure out what the rates are here. But those rates only apply when we're actually running this at full speed. So we're sitting here watching this, and it turns out that we do not, we don't keep this running at full speed all the time. So that we're cranking up, we're starting to move things. It's kind of hard to eyeball and figure out whether that's, you know, half the traffic or 2/3 the traffic or a quarter of the traffic. It does worry me that we have these holidays in the outputs. What it means is that these guys are not actually producing half a belt. I thought I'd worked out that this configuration produced half a belt of greens. Anyway, there it is. There's our green circuits. So if we head one step to our left here, we get to the advanced circuits, which have their own on-site production of electronic circuits. So we're going to start with, again, basically a river of copper and a river of iron. Same kind of layout. The difference is that we need to take that and mix it. We need to bring in plastic as well. Because, let's take a look at one of the columns here. Some of the copper turns into copper coils that are used to make the electronic circuits. And the other machine, and I'm not sure whether it's this machine is some fraction of that one, but yeah, it looks like we occasionally get a little extra from this. Anyway, this ends up feeding down to here. Yeah, it has to be more than one copper coil machine, because otherwise these guys wouldn't get fed properly. So on-site green plus copper plus add some plastic in here, and now we've got advanced circuits coming out. Same kind of loader. There's our little. I'm not using the full 8-to-8 balancer here because mostly this is balanced, but I did want to have some way of having each one of the outputs be able to choose from any one of the inputs. And notice that I am limiting these to one belt. I could have brought down two lines into the two boxes, but yeah, I didn't. Maybe next time. Like I said, these designs have been refined and evolved, which means that they have aspects of their evolution still wired into them. Okay, so processing units. Everything we did to the right. So we still have to have on-site production of electronic circuits. Okay? And on-site production of advanced circuits, which requires somehow getting green chips in from the left and copper coils in. Okay? Before we can take the green chips and the red chips and pull them together. So here's where we get the spare. So these 4 electronic circuits are feeding directly into these 4 processing units, and the 5th one just goes to making the red chips. So yeah, slight overkill on part of the build, but that allowed me to set this up as 6 separate sub-factories, 6 separate slices. So you'll notice we have 6 belts each of copper and iron coming down. And that gets us processing units. And I am so used to seeing processing units dribble out on one side of a belt that seeing this much is just, that's nice. Okay. Next thing. These are close enough together I'm not having to pause the recording. Low density structures. This was my first build that required an absolute river of copper. I mean, a river of copper. This was painful. I require more than 8 belts of copper. Slightly more than 8 belts. The original build was 8 columns, and it turns out that 8 columns of these only produced 4 blue belts, and I need slightly over 4 blue belts of LDSs to run this factory. So I had to tack on a column to the left and column to the right and get this little, extra bit of copper coming out the right and the left here off of the bottom. It's a hack. It's a crappy hack, but it works. Anyway, so we get the river of copper. We get some steel, like half as much steel. We get plastic coming out, in other words, a flood of plastic. And I just basically gave up on the plastic here. Having enough plastic was a real pain in the butt. So I just overkilled it. And I can look at this real quick. Requesting 96K. I currently have 59K. So we're basically requesting filling all this crap up. When we've got space for 32K, we start requesting trains, and we're allowing up to 4 trains. Not bad. Could probably improve my throughput, improve the health of this area here by having more parking on this line, requiring more, This seems to work. low density structures are just a massive headache, and we've got, 5. Yeah, so 5 boxes for each wagon, and each box is we balance into them from each line, and oh, that's a mess. But it finally, once I got all that together, it finally got to where it could actually have enough throughput to feed the base. Let's take a look what our consumption rate is on the LDSs. Over the last 10 hours, LDSs have averaged 1,400 per minute, roughly. So we've been battering back and forth between 13 and 1,500. Doesn't really tell me what the average here is, but in the last hour, we used 82,000 of them. You can see here the strong pulse as we ramp LDS usage up and down with the rockets. To the right of that is the RCUs. And we're heading into nighttime here. If I get out of the Spidertron, we get a little brighter. So RCUs have on-site production of the Speed 1 modules, which did complicate the factory a little bit. Not a lot, just a bit. But that means that we have red and green chips coming in, turning into these Speed Module 1s, and then the Speed Module 1s and the processing units being made into RCUs. And these whole columns, these make right up to almost, I think it's almost a half blue belt. I'm not sure what the quantity is. Let's take a look here. 10 hours, RCUs, 645 per minute. So this whole thing is 645 a minute. So all of this could go through one yellow belt. So really, yeah, this is, yeah, it is what it is. So to the right of this are my flying robot frames. Now these are not for robots. All of my construction robots and logistic robots were being made back in my builder base. The only place I'm using robots right now is for distributing basically train fuel. And I shouldn't be using them for that. I should just be belting the train fuel. That was a mistake. It was a mistake because the logistic robots do not balance their draw from the provider chest. So you end up with all of the provider chests on one end of the train get emptied out and the chests on the other end don't. So when you do a rocket fuel delivery, your 4-wagon train just sits there until you have finally forced all the robots to drain enough from the far wagon that they actually work. Anyway, so here's the flying robot frames. We've got steel and iron coming in the top. Those are going to be needed for the engines. Then we combine that with some lubricant to make electric engines, along with green chips and more steel, I believe. Nope, just green chips. And all of that then feeds down into the flying robot frames, which requires a bit of steel and green chips along with. Now, if I were doing a bot-based mega base, which I'm not doing because I think that may be not UPS friendly. May try that at some point. Then I would probably just do local assembly here. Okay, so there's our intermediates. So having figured out this base, it turns out that there are not that many different things being built. And we've got our raw materials, we've got our 4 smelters, we've got our 3 kinds of circuits, we've got the 3 important intermediates, we've got, our petroleum area, which is mainly plastic and rocket fuel right now. And now we go down to our science. I'm going to pause while I do the run. Okay, I've decided to go from the early science to the late science. So the earliest science is stuff that you can do by hand. In fact, you do it by hand to start with. So we've got the smallest possible stations for iron and copper, and a long line. Remember, this is the same size block that we're putting everything else in, down to what looks like a fairly modest science area. Now, this is, not that many more machines than I would have in my starter base. I mean, I do starter bases that have 10 assembly machines building red science. We've got 12 here. But we also have speed beacons and productivity modules. So it's not 90 per minute. This is 900 per minute. It's actually 1,000 per minute total, which gets throttled later on down to 900 per minute. And we built that. Reason why I built from here, and I've went back and forth on this during the build a couple of times. If I train it, that means that we produce at 1,000 per minute for a while, and I mean a long while, until we fill up the train station. And the train takes some away. We fill the train station again, and the train takes some away, and we fill the station again, and eventually the train stops moving because the other end is saturated. And then we finally stop. So we end up running 1,000 per minute for a very long time and then doing 0. So instead, I'm belting it from here all the way down. And this is a belt which eventually goes from blue belt to one side of the blue belt, and then it goes through a throttle area, which is each kind of science ends up on one lane of a red belt for a very short period of time. So what that means is that if we are throttled back to here, our production will throttle to 900 per minute right here. And what do we see? Let's look at our last hour. Let's kill off the... Oh, come on. Kill off the white science. There. Look at how stable this is. All of the sciences sit here right at 900 plus or minus a couple. And over the course of 10 hours, if we see here, 900, 901. So this is all very carefully arranged so that the factories themselves making the sciences get throttled back to a nice smooth 900 per minute. The areas are scaled they're provisioned to produce 1,000. So if something happens and we pause, they do catch up, but it takes a while. So it takes them 10 minutes to catch up for every minute of buffering that is gone. Here's green science. Again, you can do this by hand, although generally I don't start building green until I've got assemblers. And it's just this simple. In a starter factory, I would belt in green chips. In this case, yeah, we're building it on site. And again, this is the same size as a normal starter factory, plus or minus a couple of assemblers. But because of the beacons and the modules, this again is 1,000 per minute right here. I am not sure how I would get these rates without the mini loaders. I am pretty sure that the stack inserters maybe could keep up with it, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe. Anyway, so same thing here. That throttles to 900. Okay, next is, I believe this is military science. Yep. So while there were no biters at all on this map, I still did the military science because you need some of it. Most importantly, you have to have some military science before you can build the Spidertron, which I just love. But I also wanted to do a fair factory that did all the sciences, and that's part of it. So again, here it is. This is about the same size as a normal factory. The difference is, again, the beacons and modules. The fact that I'm doing walls on site. Normally, part of my factory would be building things for military. I'd be building a lot of ammunition of various sorts and walls and grenades and so on. I'd just truck them in. But in this case, this is all on site, which means all of this stuff comes from the trains. And military science needs enough coal that I was having problems keeping it fed. So you'll notice that I am now requesting 32K coal when these buffers can only hold 9,600. So this request is saying, please fill me up and have more trains queued up here so that as each train empties, I can slide the next train in. Actually worked this out on one of the other ones, but this is the first place we see it when we look in this order. So these trains, I have set up 2 mini loaders per wagon to unload. So even if we were drawing from here at 2 full blue belts, this would mean that we could get by with only one of the wagons sourcing, or all 4 wagons sourcing for a 25% duty cycle. I'm still not comfortable with whether these guys in this mode where they are filtering actually can output a complete packed blue belt from a cargo wagon. I know that if they're not filtering they can, but when they're set up to filter and conditionals like that, I think things start happening that limit them. Anyway, so this guy is chewing through steel and copper and iron and brick. I consider this to be the first of the reasonable challenges. Chemical science, the bane of a lot of people's existence, because it's the first one that requires petroleum, because it requires the red chips. However, if you're building the red chips and the sulfur somewhere else, that pain is all lifted away from this little factory, because all we're getting here is red chips and sulfur and iron and steel, and not a whole lot of quantities of them. Oh, there's a lane balancer on the sulfur up here, because the way I laid this factory out, we're only using sulfur from one side of the belt, we're only using red chips from one side of the belt. So yeah, not great planning. I probably could have done it a little bit differently and had it, one side of the belt preferred for one side, and then have the stuff coming in from the other side for the other side of the belt. Anyway, so there's our chemical science. Again, balanced, and it'll be followed later. We'll cover the stuff to the south in a moment. Okay, so this is production science. And you'll notice the number of stations is going up because things get complicated. And I didn't want to be moving these guys around. I couldn't really justify having a factory area out there somewhere building with 3 machines making rails or 2 machines making furnaces. So it's all in line here. 2 machines making furnaces, 2 making rods, 3 making rails, and all that feeding in here. And the other little thing at the bottom here is our productivity 1 modules. So that's all kind of together. It's not a lot of machines, but it's more different inputs than other factories normally have. And the only big one here is steel, where we do require more than 2 blue belts of steel. So that's running 3 blue belts. And the reason for that is that we've got the furnace machines together will chew up more than half a belt of steel, and the rails will chew up more than a belt. So we get 2 belts that come in and get split between these 3 guys here, and we get 1 belt coming down split between those 2. And there's all sorts of ways that could have been balanced through, but that way it worked. And again, purple science goes on the belt and gets throttled back to 900 per minute. Yellow science looks big on a lot of my builds. It looks small here because I'm able to import the processing units and the flying robot frames and the LDSs. So in other factories, I might have on-site production of these guys, and here it's just these. So we slam it right into the machines, and that goes off to research. So the other thing I need for research is I actually need space science, and you get that by launching rockets. It's kind of tricky to balance the rockets properly. Are we still going here? Yes, we are. When you build a rocket, it stops building and it spends 40 seconds. I'll show you. You have a nice long graphic that plays up. When you release the rocket, it finishes the animation, and bam! Look how fast this is going. If you add more speed modules, you can make the rocket parts faster, but it doesn't speed up the animation. So I think from now on, I am not going to use speed beacons. I will instead just simply have more silos. Because if you double the number of silos, you double the number of rockets per hour, period. If you add speed beacons, you can produce the rocket parts faster, but that 40 seconds that you are spending waiting for the animation doesn't get any shorter. So for that short period of time, these absolutely chunk through, and we're producing rapidly here. The downside is we're not requesting enough in. I should have other trains backed up on this. I guess it's just by luck that this is working. Low density structures are going to be 10. I'm going to adjust this on the fly. This train was sent to us with 1200. I don't think that's full. So 10, that's 100, that's 400, so it's going to be 1600 per train, and it's going to be 480 by 4. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my request here. So I'm going to request 5,000. and I'm going to set the threshold here. If we can deliver 1600, do so. This needs to be the same thing again. So I want to have 5,000 on site, including in trains backed up. And I want you to send me another train when I've got space for 1,600 of them. So it's quite possible at this point that our nice graph will suddenly change. So we shall see. I am changing this at, well, let's see. Oh, come on. /time. So 15 days, so at about the 16-day mark in elapsed time, I am increasing my requests here. So I expect that very shortly we will get some messages up in that we probably don't have enough RCUs and LDSs buffered to satisfy these requests. Now these actually, so I can have 3 trains assigned to each one of these. Let's make sure our max is set. Max is 3. Yep, here we go. So we don't have enough RCUs in stock to have a 3rd train with them. So it will take a while before we stop getting these messages. We're going to have to, our RCUs are going to have to run ahead, produce extras into the buffer area. Now, we have the same problem here. So why hasn't this been doing it? Well, because I was already requesting 4,800 rocket fuel. Let's go to 6,400 rocket fuel. What I'd really like to see in situations like this where they're low stacking. Oh wait, RCUs, are they low stacking? They are, okay. Where there's low stacking, I'd really like to see two trains, sometimes 3 trains, just sitting there waiting to deliver. And now we have the other, I keep forgetting about this guy. I mentioned that my only use of logistic robots was for train fuel. That's incorrect. This is the factory that produces the satellites. And the problem is there are so many discrete inputs that are needed. And I didn't really want to have a separate factory for solar panels. Well, I probably could have done a separate factory for solar panels, and the excuse would have been that's also feeding into the solar power. But solar power really is being handled by the builder base. But we definitely didn't want a separate factory for these guys down here. Which means, since we're doing it all on site, we need all of those things. So 8 different things. So what I said was, I will request in each of these into active provider chests. And I've been through a couple of iterations here. I settled on using 2 blue belts in parallel to offload. Now for things like LDSs, the offload is so fast I didn't really need to, but I made them all the same for consistency. So we offload, and that goes into yellow chests and green chests. I put in the green chests because I wanted to control where some things were. And my original thought was to have them scattered around. It turned out that localizing them like this was easier to build, and the bots are still fast enough. It did get some finagling to get the buffer quantities right, and a number of times I came back here only to find, for instance, that my requesters would be turned off. Oh, big face palm on that one. Notice I'm seeing occasionally a few weird things in buffer boxes in places. Yeah. If the wrong thing ends up in the wrong place, we could have really severe factory problems. Anyway, that's the entire factory from soup to nuts. And we ended up here at the satellite area where once we deliver the satellite, it will get delivered by a robot out to here and dropped into a rocket. And how about that? Next set of research is up. And that is a total of over 10 hours of stable operation at 900 science per minute steady, rock steady. And nice stable pattern of usage, bobbing up and down as we buffer and use buffering. If I look at the last 50 hours, you can tell that we started cranking up the factory and more things got built in, and then I started doing some rework and redirecting how things happened and turned it back on, and here we are. And we've been stable for well over 10 hours, it looks like. So it's time to lock this save off and put it somewhere safe so I can come open it back up whenever I need a reference factory for 900 per minute. Because all the bugs are fixed, quote unquote. And amazingly, the only issues that I really found that worry me from this is I found one box that had slightly wrong stuff in it. But the output from the box was a filter inserter. Yay! And it was that was where I picked up those 4 productivity modules that were hidden in the wrong place. Not sure where I got the pipes from, but the rail was in a passive provider down here. I wonder if the pipes are also there. Anyway, that's going to do it for this recording. This may be the end of the series. Any follow-ups we do will kind of be appendix episodes on, hey, I had this neat idea for doing part of this factory differently. Let's look at a branch. So until that happens, I will see you when I see you.